In the NFL, it usually takes around 6 to 8 games to get a good gauge of what every team is about. You figure out who the Super Bowl contenders are, who the playoff teams are, who the regular teams are, and who the trash teams are. Now, that can change in the second half of the season. You can have a playoff team turn into a trash team at the back end of the season, or you can have an average team turn into a Super Bowl contender. You don't know how it's going to go, but at least you get a good gauge of it, and you know which teams are most likely going to be contenders. For example, the New England Patriots, the New Orleans Saints, and the San Francisco 49ers all look like Super Bowl contenders right now. They look like it, they play like it, they're at the top of their respective divisions, and they're fighting for the number one seed in their conference. They all look like contenders. On the flip side, you have the Miami Dolphins, the Washington Redskins, and the Cincinnati Bengals. They all look like trash teams. They all look like scrub teams. They clearly are fighting for the number one pick in the draft. It just looks like that. They don't look like respectable teams. For the Ravens, that's where we get some confusion. We do not know what the Ravens are. Where do they exactly rank in this? Are they an average team? Are they a playoff team? Can you say they're a Super Bowl contending team? Or are they just a fake team that's disguised as a playoff team because of their schedule? You kind of get that confusion because, the Ravens are a unique team. They're doing things their own way. They're the only team really that has this rush first type of offense. That's what they build on. They run the football, they build off that, and then they occasionally pass. That's what the Ravens are. No one else runs the football better and more than the Ravens. That's the only offense that we have that decides to run the ball nearly as much. That's the only team that really does that. The Ravens. And you look at that and you see the positives and negatives in that. I did not know this, but did you guys know the Ravens are ranked number 1 in total yards? They have the number 1 offense. They're number 1 in time of possession. They're number 1 in rushing offense. And they're number 1 in total yards of offense. That's crazy. You look at that and you're like, well, obviously, if they're number 1 in all these categories and they're sitting here with a 4-2 record leading in the AFC North, they most certainly got to be Super Bowl contenders. Well, not exactly. Because again, you look at the schedule they play and you see the teams they beat and you'll be like, well, they've only beaten the Dolphins, the Cardinals, the Bengals, and the Steelers with the third-string quarterback. So, of course, they must be one of the average teams. They're just lucky to have an easy schedule early on. Moving forward, they're definitely going to become one of the average, most likely trash teams, and probably won't even win the division. You get that kind of feel with the Ravens. We don't really know what they could be because the 2 times they have been tested, they didn't look great. Week 1, you start with the Dolphins. That was a great example of how a team can just execute on every cylinder. If your team executes offensively, defensively, on special teams, that's the type of performance you're going to get against a bad team, not a good team. A good team will not give up that many points. If you execute on all cylinders, that's what your team's going to look like. That Miami game is what the Ravens look like when they're perfect. You go to week 2 with the Arizona Cardinals. That was more of a look like what the Ravens could be, They're a pretty solid team, pretty good team. They could be better. But, for the most part, they're going to fight. Their opponent's going to be in a little, but they can at least get the job done. You move over to week 3, Kansas City. Their first real test of the season. They did not look good. They did not look good for most of that game. They were down by, I think it was 30-13 at some point. They did not look good at all until late in that game where they made a push, started scoring points, defense made a couple stops, and they had one chance to get the ball back. After Lamar scored that touchdown, they had one chance to get the ball back. Defense couldn't make a stop on third down, game's over. So you look at that game, and the final score was close, but when you really look at it up to the fourth quarter, these look like 2 separate teams. The Chiefs look like Super Bowl contenders. The Ravens just look like an average team that was clearly outclassed. That's the kind of gauge you get with the Ravens. You really don't know what they are. You move on to the next week. All of a sudden, here we go. Now they got Cleveland. Can they prove themselves? They suffer the most embarrassing loss they've had this season. They get blown out of their own house 40-25. Wasn't even close in the fourth quarter. It was just embarrassing. They played their worst game as a defense. And you see now after 4 games, they're 2-2. You get a clear picture. Here they are. They can only beat bad teams. But when they go up against superior talent, they can't perform. They obviously crack under pressure and they just suck and they lose. You get to the next 2 weeks now, you got a bad Pittsburgh team that's fighting, has a lot of heart, and they're going to fight tough. But if you're superior to them, you have to be able to win that game soundly. The Ravens struggled in that game. The Ravens did not look good in that game. Just turnovers everywhere, big plays given up the worst moments, and had it not been for a great play by our best cornerback in Marlon Humphrey, we would have lost that game in overtime. The Ravens escaped with a win. You still take that victory, but the performance made you feel less confident that this team really is a good team. After seeing the Pittsburgh game, you would look at the Ravens as, okay, they're an average team. They're not a playoff team. They're an average team. They can win against bad competition barely, but they can't really compete with superior talent. And last week against Cincinnati didn't help that case either, because even though you were vastly superior to the Cincinnati Bengals, and you should have won that game, no problem. It should have been a blowout. The fact of the matter is, at the end of the game, the Cincinnati Bengals still had a chance to come back in this game and win it at 24-23. They couldn't get the onside kick. They failed to do that. Had they gotten that, most likely they would have scored. That's the type of situation you get. So after 6 games, with the record in 4-2, you look at the Ravens and you think, they're an average team. They're an average team. You don't really know what they are. 4-2 speaks a lot of volumes when you break it down and you see the competition they're facing and how well they performed in it. They've really, as a unit, they've only really had one great game, and that's against Miami. The Cardinals game was pretty solid, pretty good. Not great, but pretty good. The Chiefs game was bad. The Cleveland Browns game was embarrassing. The Steelers game was pathetic, but they still managed to win the game. And Cincinnati was just confusing as to how you guys let these guys still stay in the game. That's a game you should have blown them out. You didn't. Through 6 games, the Ravens have a record of a playoff team, but they look like an average team. You don't really know what to do with that. Who are the Ravens really? Have we seen the best of the Ravens? Have we seen the worst of them? Where is the in-between? Their best game was Miami. Their worst game was Cleveland. Where's the line? Where's the limit? Where's the consistency we're going to see from this Ravens team? Well, we're about to find out. Because they've got a tough stretch ahead of games they got to win. And if they come out losing them, you got teams like New England, Seattle, San Francisco, the Rams, the Texans. If they lose 4 of these 5 games, we're going to get a great answer of what they are. They're an average team. They may make the playoffs because the division's not great, but they'll be an average team. They'll be one and done. If they win the division, they'll get a home playoff game, and they'll probably lose that playoff game. That's the look you have. The Ravens have something to prove Sunday, and they got to go out there and show it. But through 6 games, just on what we've seen, the Ravens are an average team. They have a playoff team record, but they play like an average team. And of course, injuries have something to play with that. From week 1, losing Jimmy Smith, so you're just losing players all over your defense and your secondary. You know, occasionally having Marquise Brown in and out of the lineup because he's also dealing with injuries. You never know. That's your number one target. You got to adjust and you got to be able to win at times. And the Ravens, for the most part, have won the games they needed to win. But against superior talent, they have not been able to win. Are they going to show us who they are these next coming weeks? Because they've got a huge test. And if they lose 4 of their next 6 games and lose 4 of these next 5 opponents, it's going to be blaring that the Ravens are nothing more than an average team.